Canada has just gained something Washington cannot easily replace: a stronger route for its oil to the world. That means more power, more buyers, and more leverage for Canada. But behind this success is a serious problem for the United States that could get much worse. Canada built a pipeline that critics swore would never fill up. This month, it's maxed out. Trans Mountain, the 890,000 barrel per day system carrying Alberta crude to the Pacific, hit near full capacity a year and a half ahead of schedule. Oil prices have blown past $100. And American Gulf Coast refineries, engineered specifically for Canadian heavy crude, are watching their alternatives vanish. Washington can threaten Canada all it wants. It cannot conjure 4.4 million barrels a day from anywhere else. Start with a pipeline nobody believed in. The Trans Mountain expansion was finished in May 2024, tripling the original 1950s line from 300,000 barrels a day to 890,000. It carried a staggering price tag, $34 billion against an original estimate of $7.4 billion. The federal government had to buy the project from Kinder Morgan in 2018 after the builder threatened to walk away over regulatory and political risk, leaving Canadian taxpayers owning a pipeline that ran at just 84% capacity as recently as last summer. Critics openly questioned whether the investment was worth it. The CEO's own forecast put full utilization years away in 2027 or 2028. Then the Iran war changed everything. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched strikes on Iran. Within days, Iran had effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway carrying roughly 20% of global oil trade, some 20 million barrels a day. The four largest oil importers in Asia, China, Japan, South Korea, and India, suddenly found their primary Middle Eastern suppliers cut off. They turned to Canada. And the pipeline forecast to fill up in 2028 reached near capacity by April 2026. Its timeline accelerated by 1 to 2 years in a matter of weeks. Trans Mountain CEO Mark Mackey described the surge plainly at the Sear Week Energy Conference in Houston. Asian customers are highly interested in Canadian barrels. They like the country, they like the product that comes to them, he said. More than 60% of Trans Mountain volumes now ship to refineries in China, crude that has partly replaced the high sulfur grades from Iraq and Saudi Arabia that became inaccessible when Hormuz shut down. Carney did not need to make a single phone call. The market made it for him. The pricing consequence is where American drivers get exposed. With global supply tightening and the Strait of Hormuz choked, oil prices climbed above $100 a barrel. Western Canada Select the benchmark for Alberta heavy crude surged to elevated levels as the global supply crunch drove up demand. That price surge is the 80% more expensive reality. And it flows directly into what Americans pay, because the United States imports 4.4 million barrels per day of Canadian crude, 63% of all US crude imports. When the price of that crude jumps, American refiners pay more, and American drivers pay at the pump. American Gulf Coast refineries were engineered over decades to process heavy crude, the specific kind Alberta produces. You cannot switch those refineries to light crude overnight. The engineering does not permit it. With the Strait of Hormuz effectively closed, the Middle Eastern heavy crude, those refineries used as a partial alternative, is now even harder to access. That leaves Canada as the most reliable, accessible, politically stable source of heavy crude on the planet, running its pipelines at full capacity, while every alternative narrows. And if you want the real story behind how Canada is still holding its ground through tariffs, wars, and hard times, hit join below to join the membership for exclusive documentaries you won't see anywhere else about Canada's progress and rise through uncertainty. The leverage this hands Canada is structural, not rhetorical. Trump could impose more tariffs. He could threaten the CUSMA deal. He could post angry messages and call Carney governor. But he cannot conjure 4.4 million barrels a day of heavy crude from anywhere else. The physics do not allow it. The refinery engineering does not allow it. The timeline for building alternative supply chains does not allow it. Carney has never needed to say this out loud. The pipeline system says it for him. And Trans Mountain is only the visible tip. 4 separate pipeline stories are unfolding at once. The Prairie Connector, a Keystone XL revival carrying 450,000 barrels a day from Hardisty, Alberta to Cushing, Oklahoma, and the Gulf Coast, sits in a 60-day commercial assessment, with the White House confirming its entire energy team is working on the border crossing permit. Alberta's proposed Northwest Coast pipeline would add 1 million barrels a day aimed at Asian markets. And Enbridge Mainline optimization would add another 150,000 barrels a day by 2027. Combined, these projects represent roughly 2 million barrels a day of additional potential capacity. Full Trans Mountain utilization strengthens the case for all of them. Oil companies making long-term binding commitments to pipeline capacity need confidence that enough Canadian crude exists to fill the pipe for years. Trans Mountain hitting capacity within weeks of the Hormuz closure is not a problem for the Prairie Connector. It is proof of concept. It demonstrates that when Canadian oil is available, buyers come. American Gulf Coast refiners, facing the same supply crunch from a different direction, are, as Maki put it, test driving Canadian crude in this crisis. If that test drive confirms Canadian oil is reliable, accessible, and price competitive, which it is proving right now, those buyers will want long-term contracts. The dual effect on Canada is significant. Canadian oil producers are making more money than they have in years, with Western Canada Select trading at elevated levels, Alberta government royalties rising, and oil sands companies reporting record cash flows. But more importantly for the trade negotiation, Canada now has a credible alternative to the American market. Trans Mountain does not send oil to the United States, it sends oil to Asia. When Carney says he is diversifying away from US dependence, the pipeline is the physical proof it is already happening. An honest account acknowledges the limits. If the Strait of Hormuz reopens, oil prices will fall, and some of Canada's emergency leverage will diminish. Asian buyers who rushed to Trans Mountain in the crisis may scale back when Middle Eastern supply resumes, and the pipeline that is full today could return to 80-something% utilization when the geopolitical pressure eases. There is also legitimate debate. Simon Fraser University's Thomas Gunton argued in the Globe and Mail that Canada does not actually need a brand new pipeline, since Trans Mountain optimization could add 300,000 barrels a day through pumps and drag-reducing agents at a fraction of new build cost. And high oil prices cut both ways. They benefit Canadian producers, but they also hurt Canadian consumers, paying more for gasoline and heating fuel, adding inflationary pressure at a moment when the Bank of Canada is already managing trade war uncertainty. Full pipeline utilization does not resolve the dairy dispute or settle CUSMA on its own, but the fundamental reality holds. Canada built the infrastructure before the crisis arrived, and when the crisis came, the world turned to Canadian crude. The pipeline is full. Prices are above $100. Asian buyers are locking in supply. American Gulf Coast refineries are engineered for a heavy crude only Canada can reliably provide, and the Middle Eastern alternative is offline. Trump wanted Canada dependent on the American market. The Iran war proved Canada has an alternative that works, and that the rest of the world is willing to pay a premium for Canadian barrels, while American drivers have no backup plan at all.